lighting's bad, okay? There's not much I can do about it. It's fucking fall. The seasonal affective is kicking right in. We're gonna light some candles and call it spooky. Autumnal. Does this help with the lighting? I feel like it doesn't, and it also increases my chances of catching my hair on fire. It's a Tuesday for me. It's supposed to be my filming day. I went back to bed. I had a nap, and I think that, you know, fall is here with all its perks. So we're feeling very low energy around here. So I thought I'd film a tag video, and I'm going all the way back to a tag I did not do 5 whole months ago. I was tagged by Bookworm Adventure Girl, and it's called the Faces of Horror tag. I figured this was kind of a good season to do the tag. I haven't actually looked at the prompts too much, so this will be a sort of off the cuff tag, because that's what we're fucking doing today, guys. Okay? We put the hat on, we're feeling autumnal, and I'm probably gonna go back to bed once this is done. So fun fact about this is a like horror reading tag, which I don't really read horror. That's probably gonna be a bit of a problem, but I decided that I would try to do the tag anyway and see if I could find some creative workarounds, because I'm a weenie and I find a lot of books scary that are not in the horror genre. Prompt number 1. A horror story that scared or disturbed you. I'm gonna pick a scary ass thriller. I'm gonna pick Sadie by Courtney Summers, which I've talked about before. It's a super like punch you in the gut thriller, and it totally perturbed me and freaked me out for a long time. Carefully read like trigger warnings for this book because there are some topics on here which are just intensely bad. It follows 2 storylines. It follows Sadie, who's a young teenage girl who's trying to find her little sister's killer, and it follows the podcaster Sometime Behind, who's trying to solve Sadie's own disappearance. And it's very nerve-wracking. It did scare me because there were some aspects of it that just felt so true to life, and the podcaster, you know, portions just feel like a true crime podcast, and it felt like it could happen, which is why I think I found it kind of scary. It is a really good read though, if you're into kind of like thrillers in general. Prompt number 2, a horror story that depressed you or made you cry. So for this one, I decided to go with a dystopia story. I'm gonna pick The Power by Naomi Alderman. This was an initially assigned reading for me from my good friend Jay from My Quarter Life Crisis. Jay, come back. You're not allowed to leave me on here. Get your ass back on YouTube. She's a real life friend that I met through booktubes, so I am allowed to say that to her. So basically, this is a dystopia story, and it follows kind of our present day society, sort of. It's a very recognizable society. It feels like our global world. What happens is like a sort of glitch in evolution. Females have evolved something called a skein, like vestigial organ kind of underneath the collarbone that lets them generate electric shocks, kind of like electric eels. It follows multiple characters and storylines as they sort of navigate this newfound flip in physical power, because pretty much all women are now directly able to physically overwhelm men. They're just stronger. So I thought this book was really, really well written, but I didn't super enjoy it because it was really fucking depressing. It sort of addresses the cultural thing that if you put women in power, women would be so much more benevolent and good leaders, and this is sort of, I would say, an argument against that. It's a little bit Animal Farm in the sense that whenever you give people who have power, who didn't have power before, the power still corrupts and they become the thing that they hate. So I just found it really depressing. And so I found that story a little bit horrifying. So I'm gonna call it my horror pick. Prompt number 3 is a horror story that made you laugh. I'm gonna pick Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I would call it like actual horror, even though I understand it's children's horror. It's very soft horror. It follows the story, I think, of like an 11-year-old girl who she feels kind of like bored and like neglected by her parents, and she doesn't really get what she wants, and she doesn't think her parents are that great. She finds this like bricked up passageway in her house. It's been a while since I've read it, but she gets to like cross through it one night. It's like an alternate universe, and it's still her family, with the exception that they have buttons for eyes, and then they are perfect. Like, they're very caring, they always have time for her, they cook really well, but also it's a horror story and things are not as they seem. I do remember that this book was genuinely funny. I think there was a cat in there, and the cat made me laugh quite a few times. If you like Nightmare Before Christmas, you'll love Coraline. It's the same sort of vibes. I did read something once that said that kids read it as an adventure story and adults read it as horror, which would be really interesting to find out, and I don't know if any of you have small children, but I'd love to know if they see just the adventure aspects versus the horror aspects. Prompt number 4, a horror story that made you angry. I picked A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. So this was the book that made me realize that I'm not going to be reading horror anytime soon. This is the only one that I think is actually like true adult horror. I picked it up because I thought the cover was like great. Oh my gosh, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be a bunch of Buffy librarians, you know, killing vampires in the South. No. So the reason this book made me angry is because I hated it. And even though I think I hated it, I'm pretty sure I like rated it 3 stars. There's something like very off about my star rating system. Like, I just refuse to rate books as low as they should be rated. It's about a bunch of like middle-aged moms in the 1990s who start, you know, getting very suspicious of this sort of perfect neighbor who's very popular amongst their like companions. I think a bunch of children and teenagers like in the area start dying in like gruesome ways, and I just hated this book. It is really intensely about like body horror, and there's some really like gross horror things that happen in here. It's not my jam. And if that's your jam, good for you. I will give you all the horror books to read, you glorious creatures. But no, I really didn't like it. And there were some things, again, trigger warnings, there were some things very specifically that were happening to young children and young females and females in general that were just like, I can't stand reading that in literature, and it was not a fun read, and I sort of can't believe I finished it. I kept thinking it was going to get better, and I probably should have just ducked out after the first couple chapters. Prompt number 5, a horror story that's important to you. I picked something which I found was horrific in real life, but I also thought it was an important story to read. I picked In Order to Live, A North Korean Girl's Journey to Freedom by Yeonmi Park. It's her memoir of how she escaped North Korea. She just talks about her life and her experiences and how she physically got out of North Korea. And it's just devastating because it was very much an out of the frying pan into the fryer sort of situation. She did the China crossing. It's the easiest way to get out of North Korea. Unfortunately, North Korea and China are in a close relationship, so if they catch you in China, bad things happen, and then they also send you back. She does get out of North Korea. She makes it into China, where she has to live as a fugitive. Because she is young and female, she gets trafficked with her mother, and it's excruciatingly bad. She eventually makes her way into South Korea, and from there she immigrated to either Canada or the US, I can't remember. But it's her story of her life, and it's tremendously powerful. I'm not always in the mood for these kind of books because they are like really rough stories, but she did come out of it, and she came out as a pretty whole person who was still like really just happy to be alive and wanted to wear blue jeans, have food in the fridge, and like be able to eat an egg. But I'd give it a read if you're into like powerful memoirs, because what she survived was pretty amazing. Yeah. And prompt number 6, lastly, a non-horror story that you consider horror. Pretty much all my picks on this list have not really been horror because I can't. Because I'm a weenie. So most of the things on this list, and then I'm gonna go with a film to just kind of like shake it up a little bit. I'm gonna add in Parasite, which was the Oscar-winning Korean drama. It follows two families, one very poor, one very wealthy, and really does a good job of examining like wealth inequality and greed through the story it builds. Basically, the poorer family sort of infiltrates the wealthier family through a series of facades to take over jobs in their house, like driving, cleaning, tutoring. And it's a really interesting story. And then about halfway through, it takes a fucking turn and it turns the whole narrative on its head. And to me, that's the latter half of the film that reads specifically horror. I don't know. It's not classed as horror. I think it would maybe be more like suspense, but to me, it's horror. If you've watched the movie, let me know. I really don't want to give spoilers on it because it's an excellent film. It is also beautifully shot and very deserving of its Oscar. That is the Faces of Horror tag, and I'm probably not going to read any horror books for Halloween. Sorry, guys. I am going to tag a friend in this because I know that she genuinely does enjoy horror, and that is going to be Gina at Gina's Library. So I'd be really interested to see your picks, Gina, because I pulled a bunch of books that are not actually horror. I hope you guys are enjoying the spooky season as well as its many faces of seasonal depression for me. Hopefully I'm going to have a little more energy the next time I see you, but I thought this would be a nice low-key tag. So thanks for watching. As always, thanks for sticking around, and I will see you all next week.